He woke up before the alarm, the same way he had for years. The room was quiet, but his mind was already loud. Thoughts about work filled his head before his feet even touched the floor. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks, like he always did when he felt tired before the day even began. Outside, the sky was still dark, and the city had not fully woken up yet. That used to make him feel calm. Now it only reminded him that another long day was waiting. He got ready in silence. The routine never changed. Wash his face, button the same shirt, tie the same shoes, grab the same bag. Every movement felt automatic, like his body was working while his heart stayed behind. He glanced at the mirror, but did not really see himself. He just saw someone who looked older than he felt. Someone who carried stress in his shoulders and quiet frustration in his eyes. The ride to work was crowded. People pushed, phones buzzed, and voices mixed into one constant noise. He stood there holding the rail, watching the city move past him. Buildings, shops, billboards, all flashing by like reminders that life outside the office was still happening. Somewhere out there, people were starting businesses, chasing dreams, laughing over coffee. He wondered when he stopped feeling like one of them. When he reached the office, the air felt heavy. The lights were bright, the floors were clean, and the walls were covered with posters about teamwork and success. He always found those posters ironic. They talked about respect and growth, but the people in charge never practiced either. He walked to his desk and sat down without greeting anyone. Not because he was rude, but because he had learned that greetings often went unnoticed. His work was good. Everyone knew it, even if they did not say it out loud. He stayed late when projects needed extra effort. He fixed problems others ignored. He trained new people without being asked. Yet none of that seemed to matter. Praise was rare, and when success came, someone else took credit for it. Mistakes, however small, were never forgotten. By mid-morning, the tension started to rise. He could feel it in the air, like a storm building slowly. Meetings were scheduled back-to-back, and everyone knew what that meant. It meant pressure. It meant blame. It meant someone would be singled out, and more often than not, it was him in the meeting room. Sat quietly, notebook open, pen ready. The boss entered with confidence, speaking loudly, acting like the room belonged to him alone. He talked about targets, deadlines, and numbers that never seemed realistic. When questions came up, he brushed them aside. When problems were mentioned, his eyes scanned the room, looking for someone to point at. Soon enough, the focus shifted to a project that had been struggling. The boss spoke as if the failure was personal, as if someone had chosen to make things difficult. Without warning, his gaze landed on him. "This is your responsibility," the boss said sharply. "You were supposed to handle this." He opened his mouth to explain. He had raised concerns weeks ago. He had asked for resources. He had warned them about the risks. But the boss did not let him finish. "Excuses again," the boss said, shaking his head. "If you can't handle pressure, maybe this place isn't for you." The room went quiet. Everyone looked down at their notes or screens. No one spoke up. No one ever did. He felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, that mix of anger and shame. Not because he was wrong, but because he was tired of being treated like this. He nodded and said nothing. Arguing never helped. It only made things worse. The meeting ended with more criticism and unrealistic demands. When people filed out, some avoided eye contact. A few gave him quick, sympathetic looks, but sympathy did not change anything. Back at his desk, he tried to focus. The screen blurred as thoughts rushed in. He thought about the nights he stayed late while others left early. He thought about the weekends he worked while promises of promotion stayed empty. He thought about how his efforts had become expected, not appreciated. Around lunchtime, his phone buzzed. A message from home. A simple question asking when he would be back. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. He did not know how to answer. He never knew. Work always came first, even when it should not have. He skipped lunch, as usual. He told himself he would eat later, though later often never came. Instead, he stood by the window for a moment, watching cars move below. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere with purpose. He wondered if he was moving at all, or just standing still while time passed him by. The afternoon was worse than the morning. Emails piled up, deadlines were moved closer. Instructions changed without warning. Every time he asked for clarity, he was told to figure it out. The boss passed by his desk once, stopped, and glanced at his screen. "You're still on this?" the boss asked. "I need results, not effort." That sentence stayed with him. Results, not effort. As if effort meant nothing. As if long hours, stress, and personal sacrifice were worthless unless they produced immediate praise. Something shifted inside him then. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was a quiet realization. He understood that no matter how much he gave, it would never be enough. The goalposts would always move. The respect he hoped to earn would never arrive. As the day dragged on, he remembered conversations from outside work. Long rides where people talked about ideas, plans, and possibilities. Moments where he felt heard, where his thoughts mattered. Those rides were not about showing off or chasing status. They were about growth, learning, and trust. He had never talked about that part of his life at the office. He never felt the need to. Work and personal worlds stayed separate, or so he thought. By evening, the office emptied out. One by one, desks went dark. He was still there again. He finished the last task, saved the files, and leaned back in his chair. The silence felt heavy, but honest. No voices, no criticism, no pretending. He looked around the office that had taken so much from him. The place where he had poured years of energy. The place that promised security, but delivered stress. For the first time, he asked himself a serious question. What if he stopped accepting this? The thought scared him. Leaving meant uncertainty. It meant stepping into the unknown. But staying meant something worse. It meant slowly losing himself. He packed his bag and stood up. His legs felt heavy, but his mind felt strangely clear. On the way out, he passed the boss's office. The door was closed, the lights still on. For a moment, he imagined knocking, speaking his truth, demanding respect. But he knew it would change nothing. Words had already failed here. Outside, the night air felt cool against his face. He took a deep breath, one he felt all the way down to his chest. It felt different from the shallow breaths he took inside. It felt real. On the ride home, he sat near the window, watching reflections of city lights flicker across the glass. He thought about fear, about loyalty, about the idea that quitting meant losing. Society taught him that leaving a job was weakness, that endurance was strength. But what if strength meant knowing when to walk away? When he reached home, he did not turn on the lights right away. He sat in the quiet, letting the day settle. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from someone he trusted deeply. Just a simple check-in. No demands. No pressure. Just presence. He smiled faintly. In that moment, the decision became real. Not fully formed, not yet spoken, but alive. He knew something had ended that day, even if no one else realized it yet. He went to bed later than usual, but his mind did not race the way it normally did. Instead, a calm determination settled in. Tomorrow, he would return to the office. He would do his job, but deep down, he knew he was already leaving. The breaking point had arrived quietly, without shouting or drama, just a tired man finally listening to himself. And once that happens, there is no going back. The next morning started like every other, but it felt different. He noticed it the moment he opened his eyes. The same ceiling, the same quiet room, yet something inside him was steady instead of heavy. The weight was still there, but it no longer pressed on his chest. He got out of bed without rushing, without that familiar sense of dread chasing him. He followed his routine again, but this time he was watching himself do it. Buttoning the shirt, tying the shoes, picking up the bag. Everything looked the same on the outside, but the meaning had changed. This was no longer a life sentence. It was just another step towards something else. On the way to work, he stood in the same crowded space, surrounded by tired faces. He wondered how many of them felt the same way he had felt for years. How many wanted to leave but stayed because fear was louder than hope. He did not judge them. He had been one of them when he walked into the office. No one noticed anything different. They never did. To them, he was just another worker showing up on time. He sat at his desk and opened his computer. Emails poured in immediately. Requests, demands, messages written without kindness or patience. He answered them calmly. There was no rush in his fingers anymore. He worked with focus, not fear. That alone felt like a small rebellion. By mid-morning, the boss appeared again. Loud footsteps, strong voice, the usual presence that filled the room and pushed everyone else into silence. He stopped near the desk and looked down. "I need you in my office," the boss said. No greeting, no explanation. He stood up and followed. The walk felt longer than usual, but his heartbeat stayed even. Inside the office, the boss closed the door and leaned against the desk. "I've been thinking about yesterday," the boss said. "This project needs more commitment." He listened without interrupting. He had learned long ago that listening was safer than speaking. "You've been slipping," the boss continued. "I don't know what's distracting you, but if you want to keep your position here, you need to prove yourself." That sentence landed differently this time. Before, it would have cut deep. Now, it felt empty. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "I understand," he said quietly. The boss waved him off, satisfied with the control he believed he still had. As he left the office, he realized something important. Fear was the boss's greatest tool, and fear was losing its grip on him. The rest of the day passed in pieces. Tasks completed, messages sent, corrections made. But his mind kept drifting back to one thought: timing. He knew quitting was not just about walking out. It was about choosing the right moment. During a short break, he checked his phone. There were messages from people he often rode with, short conversations, plans being discussed, opportunities hinted at, not promised. These people never spoke in grand words. They spoke in action, in consistency. He remembered how those connections started. Simple conversations during long rides. Talks about work, about life, about mistakes. No one tried to impress anyone. That was what made it real. Trust grew slowly, naturally. At the office, no one knew about this side of him. They saw a worker, not a thinker, not a planner, not someone quietly building something outside those walls. In the afternoon, a mistake happened. Not his. But as usual, it found its way to him. An email went out to the entire team, pointing out the issue and questioning responsibility. His name was mentioned. He stared at the screen for a long moment. The old reaction tried to rise. The urge to defend himself, to explain, to prove his worth, but he stopped himself. Instead, he replied simply, clear facts, no emotion, no apology for something that was not his fault. Then he returned to his work. A few minutes later, whispers started. People noticed. He had not panicked. He had not over-explained. He had not stayed late to fix what was not his responsibility. For the first time, he let the system show its own flaws. The boss stormed out of the office again later that day, clearly upset. He raised his voice, questioned people, demanded answers. When his eyes landed on him, there was a pause. "Did you finish your part?" the boss asked. "Yes," he replied calmly. "It was sent yesterday." The boss checked the records. Silence followed. Nothing more was said. The moment passed, but something had shifted. Respect had not appeared, but confusion had. As evening approached, he packed up on time. That alone felt strange. Usually, he stayed late out of habit, even when no one asked. Today, he stood up, shut down his computer, and left. Outside, the sky was painted in soft colors. He walked instead of rushing. Each step felt lighter. He knew he was still inside the system, but he was no longer owned by it. That night, he met with people he trusted. No formal meeting. Just conversation. Stories were shared. Lessons discussed. No one asked him to quit. No one pushed him. They simply listened. One of them said something simple that stayed with him. Sometimes leaving is not about anger. It's about alignment. He thought about that on the way home. Alignment. His job no longer aligned with who he was becoming. The next few days followed a similar pattern. The boss tested him. Gave extra work. Watched closely, almost waiting for him to break or beg. But he didn't either. He stayed professional. Calm, focused .co-workers began to notice the change. Some asked if he was okay. Others joked that he seemed relaxed for someone under pressure. He smiled and said nothing. Inside, a plan was forming. Not written down. Not announced. Just a quiet certainty. He knew what he needed to do, and he knew when. Then came the message that confirmed everything. A short invitation, a chance to be part of something bigger. Not guaranteed success, but real opportunity. It did not promise comfort. It promised growth. He did not reply right away. He sat with the decision. He weighed risk against regret. He imagined staying where he was for another year. The thought made his chest tighten. That night, he drafted a simple resignation letter. Nothing dramatic, no accusations. Just the truth. He saved it and closed the file. Not yet. The next morning at work, the boss announced a new target. Higher expectations, fewer resources, more pressure. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what it meant. He looked around at the familiar faces. Tired, quiet, resigned. He felt a wave of sadness, not for himself, but for them. He had been them for too long. Back at his desk, he opened the saved file. He read the letter once. It felt right. Not emotional. Not bitter. Honest. He did not submit it yet. He leaned back and took a deep breath. The moment was close. He could feel it. That day ended without drama. No shouting. No confrontation. Just the calm before change. As he left the building, he knew something important. He was no longer quitting to escape pain. He was preparing to step into purpose, and the boss still believed he was in control. That belief would not last much longer. The morning felt lighter than usual. He woke up without the weight of dread pressing down on him. The air in the room seemed clearer, quieter, almost inviting. He moved slowly, letting each action sink in, brushing his teeth, washing his face, making himself a simple breakfast. Even the sound of the kettle boiling felt peaceful. Something had shifted inside him. The fear that had clung to him for years was loosening. He checked his phone during breakfast. Messages from the people he trusted were waiting. They were simple, almost casual. Plans, updates, a joke or two. No pressure. No expectations, just connection. He smiled. The reminder that there was a world outside his office. A world where people valued honesty and effort. Was comforting. The ride to work was the same crowded train. The same pressing bodies. The same dull hum of engines and conversations. But he watched it all differently. He noticed how people's eyes darted nervously to phones. How parents held children's hands tightly. How tired faces carried small victories or defeats. He realized that life was happening in every direction and that he did not have to live trapped in one corner. When he entered the office, nothing had changed on the surface. The lights were still bright, the posters about teamwork still hung on the walls, and the computers hummed the same tune. Yet he carried himself differently. Calm. Observant. Confident. In the quietest way, the first hours were routine. Emails, calls, documents. People asked questions. Made small requests, and he responded clearly. Without overextending himself. Something was different. He did not need to please anyone. He did not need to fight to be noticed. He was doing what he needed to do, nothing more, nothing less. During the late morning, a coworker approached, hesitating. The kind of hesitation that spoke of uncertainty, maybe fear. "You seem different," they said quietly. He chuckled lightly. "Maybe I am." The coworker nodded, not pushing for more. Some things could not be explained in words, only felt. Then came the meeting. He walked into the conference room and noticed the boss pacing back and forth. Papers shuffled, pen tapped. The boss's usual energy, the forceful aura that made everyone shrink slightly in their seats, was there. But today he felt prepared. He would listen, speak if necessary, and let the moment pass without losing himself. The discussion began. Deadlines, failures, progress reports. The boss singled out problems, expecting someone to react. Eyes scanned the room. His gaze met theirs only once, long enough to check if he was panicked. He was not. He remained quiet, attentive, composed. When the discussion shifted to the project he had handled, the boss began to criticize softly at first, then more sharply. Mistakes were exaggerated. Responsibility implied. "I need you to explain this," the boss said. He spoke simply, concisely, focusing only on facts. No defense. No emotion. The room was quiet. Some colleagues were surprised at the calmness, at the lack of panic. He noticed the shift. Power, which had always been taken for granted, was no longer automatic. After the meeting, he returned to his desk. Emails flooded in again, minor emergencies and questions, but his approach remained steady. The difference was noticeable. He was acting as if the work belonged to him as much as to the company, as if his energy was not expendable for free. And in truth, it was not. Lunch arrived. He skipped it at first, but a simple thought reminded him. His body needed fuel, not punishment. He ate quietly, alone, savoring each bite. Outside, a coworker tried to strike a conversation, small talk about deadlines and complaints. He responded politely, but without engagement. He was learning boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. In the afternoon, a call arrived from someone he rode with. Their voice was casual, but the words carried opportunity. A project, something different, a chance to work with people who valued skill, ideas, and trust. No promises, only possibility. That was enough. His mind wandered as he ended the call. He realized something he had long ignored. His life outside that office had power he never acknowledged. Knowledge, skills, networks, relationships. Quiet, consistent, and reliable. He had been living two separate worlds, but now one was preparing to intersect with the other. Later, a small crisis arose in the office. A client had a sudden demand, urgent and impossible within the usual parameters. Everyone froze, waiting for direction. The boss flailed, gesturing, questioning, pointing. Old habits wanted to push him into panic, but he resisted. He calmly assessed the situation, outlined what could be done, suggested a solution. Simple, clear, actionable. The room looked at him. Some in surprise, some in grudging respect. The boss's eyebrows furrowed, not in appreciation, but in something like realization. He had underestimated this calm, steady presence. The rest of the day passed without drama. Tasks completed. Small victories noted silently. He noticed how he no longer sought approval, no longer feared rebuke. His mind was focused on what mattered to him, what was coming next. As evening approached, he packed up and left on time. The streets were alive with people heading home, meeting friends, starting something new. He walked to the train station slowly, observing, reflecting. Life was larger than the office, larger than the daily grind. He had almost forgotten that, but now it was impossible to ignore. That night he met with his group. A quiet space. Coffee cups, laughter, shared stories. They discussed the projects they were planning, problems they were solving, challenges they expected. Nothing flashy. No pretension. Just growth and learning. He realized how much he had missed by living solely for work that did not see him as a whole person. One of them looked at him and said, "You're ready?" He did not fully understand at the moment. Ready for what? The words stayed with him as he went home. He thought about balance, about purpose, about the courage it would take to act decisively. At home, he opened the file he had started days ago. The resignation letter. Simple. Honest. Not bitter. not accusatory, just the truth. He read it again. Each word resonated. Each word was a commitment to himself. He saved it but did not send it yet. Timing was crucial. He had to be confident that when he acted, it would be complete and irreversible. He could no longer be half present in a world that did not fully value him. In the quiet hours before sleep, he thought about the office, about the boss, about the people who relied on him but did not notice, about the mistakes that had been pinned unfairly. And then he thought about the people who believed in him, the ones he rode with. A network of trust, of opportunity, of growth. Sleep came easier than before, not because life had changed, but because he had begun to see the path forward. A path not defined by fear or obligation, but by self-respect and potential. Tomorrow, he knew, would be another day of work. But something had shifted. He was no longer a prisoner of routine. He was an observer, a participant, a thinker, a planner. And quietly, the plan in his mind moved closer to reality. Change was coming. He could feel it. And when it arrived, it would not be a scream or a confrontation. It would be a quiet, unstoppable force of someone finally aligning their life with their true self. The morning air felt crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the staleness of the office he had walked into for years. He got ready slowly, savoring the quiet moments before the rush of the day. Breakfast was simple, yet comforting, a small act of self-care that had been absent during years of stress and routine. His phone buzzed with messages from the people he trusted, reminders of meetings, updates, and casual conversation. Nothing urgent, nothing demanding. Just connection. The ride to work was familiar yet different. He watched the people around him with a detached curiosity. Their tired faces, anxious gestures, the way they clutched their bags or phones, all of it reminded him of what he had left behind inside the office walls. He had been one of them, trapped in invisible chains of expectation, fear, and obligation. Now he moved through the crowd with a quiet strength. The world was alive, and he was ready to step forward, yet while still walking the old streets. Inside the office, nothing seemed to change on the surface. Fluorescent lights buzzed. Computers hummed. The boss paced, papers shuffled, and employees settled into their routines. He sat at his desk, ready to work, but with a subtle difference. His mind was no longer consumed by fear. He was aware, observant, and quietly confident. By mid-morning, the first hint of disruption began. A major client had requested changes to a project that seemed impossible under the current timeline and resources. The office buzzed with tension. The boss appeared, raising his voice, questioning people, demanding explanations. The usual panic that spread across the team barely touched him. He assessed the situation, weighed what could be done realistically, and started to outline a plan in his mind. Not for approval, not for praise, just for action. During lunch, he stepped outside. The sunlight felt refreshing. The air was alive with possibilities. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from the people he trusted about a new opportunity. They needed someone reliable, someone who could manage pressure, someone who had experience but also vision. It was not a promise, but a chance. A door opening that he had been waiting for silently for months. Back in the office, tension escalated. The boss, oblivious to what was happening outside, tried to control every detail. He flailed, raised his voice, and questioned decisions that were not his responsibility. Everyone else seemed paralyzed, waiting for direction that would not come. He quietly implemented a solution. Not flashy, not showy, just effective. Emails were sent. Calls were made. Deadlines rearranged. Clients reassured. By the time the boss looked up from his desk, the immediate crisis had passed. There was a pause, a long, silent moment where realization began to settle. The calm, collected employee, who had always seemed ordinary, was now capable, autonomous, and valuable in ways the boss had never fully appreciated. Later, he received another message. It confirmed his growing suspicion that the opportunities outside the office were real. A project needed someone with his exact skills, someone who could manage pressure, communicate clearly, and maintain trust with multiple stakeholders. The timing was perfect. The chance to leave was not impulsive anymore. It was calculated, planned, aligned with his values. He spent the afternoon finishing his tasks efficiently, without overextending himself. His coworkers noticed the shift in energy, whispering among themselves about how composed he seemed under pressure. Some admired it. Some were curious, but none could fully grasp the quiet strength he had cultivated. The boss called him into the office again. The usual tension filled the air. He closed the door, leaned against the desk, and spoke. "This project isn't moving fast enough. I need you to push harder," the boss said sharply. He looked up calmly. "The project is on track. Adjustments were made, and the client is satisfied with the interim updates." The boss's expression faltered, a subtle hint of confusion replacing the usual certainty. For the first time, he saw that control was slipping. Power, which had been taken for granted, was no longer absolute. After leaving the office, he walked to meet the people he trusted. They discussed the details of the project outside, the possibilities it presented, and the impact he could have if he fully committed. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was pressured. Just clarity, focus, and alignment with real opportunity. The ride back home was quiet. He reflected on the day, recognizing how much had shifted in the subtle balance of control. The office world, which had seemed invincible, was fragile. Decisions made with arrogance were vulnerable to those who had skill, patience, and trust. That evening, he finalized his resignation letter. Simple, honest, and direct. Not emotional, not accusatory, just truth. He saved it with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that soon it would be submitted. The moment would be decisive, irreversible, and right. He slept with a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Not fear, not anxiety. Only clarity. Tomorrow would be the day, and he would step forward fully into the world he had been preparing for. The boss, still unaware of the real forces at play, had no idea that the balance of power was about to shift. And when that shift happened, it would be complete and undeniable. The morning sun crept over the city, soft golden light spilling into his apartment. He woke with a calm clarity he had not felt in years. The day had arrived, the day he had prepared for. The day he would step fully into a life that aligned with his values and purpose. He moved through his routine without haste, each motion deliberate, each thought focused. No panic, no dread, only intention. Breakfast was quiet. He savored each bite, mindful and present, thinking about the hours ahead. The resignation letter sat in his bag, ready to be submitted. He had read it several times, and each reading reinforced the certainty that he was doing the right thing. Leaving was not escape. It was alignment with who he had become. With the opportunities he had nurtured outside the office walls, on the ride to work, he noticed things differently. The city moved around him in a rhythm he had almost forgotten. People rushed, cars honked, footsteps echoed. Life was busy, chaotic, unpredictable, and he was part of it, not trapped by it. He allowed himself a small smile, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had regained perspective. Arriving at the office, everything seemed the same. The same fluorescent lights, the same computers, the same people moving through routine, but he carried a presence that was unmistakable, calm, certain, confident. He walked to his desk with purpose, knowing that this day would be different from all others. Emails were waiting as always, but he approached them without urgency. He addressed matters that needed attention efficiently, without sacrificing clarity or dignity. He responded to colleagues politely, yet without unnecessary explanation. His focus was on the essential, on what mattered, not on appeasing the boss. By mid-morning, a major client issue arose. The team froze. The boss flailed, trying to assert control, demanding immediate action without considering realistic solutions. The tension in the room was palpable. He assessed the situation calmly, formulated a clear plan, and began implementing it. Emails were sent, calls were made, updates organized. By the time the boss looked up, the problem was largely resolved. The boss's face betrayed disbelief. He had always relied on fear and compliance to maintain control. But the quiet competence of this employee, once underestimated, had changed the dynamics. There was no panic, no desperation, only action, logic, and effectiveness. After the crisis, the boss called him into the office. The usual tension filled the air, but this time it was different. He entered without hesitation, carrying the calm authority of someone who knew his worth and had prepared for this exact moment. "Sit," the boss commanded. Voice sharp but cautious, he did, maintaining eye contact, neither intimidated nor defensive. "I don't understand how this project is managed so well without constant supervision," the boss said, frustration evident. He smiled faintly. "It has been managed with care, attention, and planning. I prioritize clarity and action over fear. The results speak for themselves." The boss's confusion deepened. Control, which had always been his strength, felt shaky now. The realization that this employee, someone he had underestimated, was not reliant on his authority, began to settle in. He had no leverage, no way to assert power over someone who was already beyond control. He left the office calmly after submitting the resignation letter. The act was quiet, unceremonious, yet powerful. There were no dramatic confrontations, no accusations, just the final, decisive step in reclaiming his life. He walked out with dignity, a sense of completion, and an unshakable confidence that came from aligning action with truth. Outside, the air was refreshing. The city moved around him, alive and vibrant. People hustled to work, to meetings, to errands. He walked past them, fully aware of his presence and choices. He was free from the invisible chains that had bound him for so long. That evening, met with the people he trusted, the ones who had been part of his life outside the office. There were no grand speeches, no celebrations, just conversation, planning, and shared understanding. They spoke of projects, opportunities, and the potential impact of their work. It was not about status or recognition. It was about contribution, growth, and alignment with values. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here at the years of routine, stress, and undervalued effort. The small moments of insight and preparation, the quiet connections outside the office that had nurtured trust, growth, and opportunity. He realized that leaving was not just about escaping a difficult environment. It was about stepping fully into a life that honored his skills, integrity, and vision. Weeks later, the boss began to feel the consequences of underestimating him. Projects faltered, decisions that required competence and trust faltered, and clients noticed the difference. Attempts to regain control were clumsy and ineffective. The realization that the employee had been quietly connected to networks and resources beyond the office walls dawned slowly, painfully. By then, it was too late. Influence, authority, and opportunity had shifted, and there was no way to reclaim them. The protagonist, meanwhile, thrived. Opportunities that had once seemed distant or uncertain became tangible. He worked with people who valued skill, insight, and collaboration. Each step forward was measured, deliberate, and meaningful. Success was no longer defined by compliance or approval, but by impact, growth, and purpose. He occasionally thought of the office he left behind. He felt no resentment, only clarity. The lessons were clear. Respect cannot be demanded through fear. Value is not recognized until it cannot be controlled. And personal alignment, trust, preparation are the quiet but powerful forces that shape life. Life continued, complex, unpredictable, and challenging, but he faced it with confidence. Decisions were no longer reactive, but deliberate. Each day was an opportunity to grow, contribute, and align action with integrity. And he knew that the moment of quitting, once feared, once delayed, had been the catalyst for everything that followed. The story closed not with drama, but with quiet triumph. A man who had endured, observed, and prepared stepped into a life that recognized his value, honored his skills, and respected his presence. And the boss, once certain of control and authority, could only witness the shift too late, realizing that some forces, once aligned, cannot be contained or reversed. The day after submitting his resignation felt different from any other. He woke up with a sense of calm that was both unfamiliar and liberating. There was no rush, no anxiety, no looming deadlines that would dictate his mood. Breakfast was slow and intentional. The simple act of sipping tea, feeling the warmth, and observing the morning light brought a clarity he had never experienced while trapped in the office routine. He checked his phone and smiled at the messages from the people he trusted. The network he had cultivated over time was not flashy or loud, but it was steady, reliable, and filled with genuine support. Opportunities were emerging, discussions were underway, and small collaborations were already forming. This was the world he had been preparing for, quietly and methodically. The morning was spent planning, not reacting. He reviewed notes, considered projects, and thought through possible actions. Everything was aligned with purpose. There was no need to prove anything to anyone else. The focus was on clarity, impact, and growth. He realized how much he had missed out on when his energy was drained in the office, consumed by fear and obligation as he prepared for the day. A message came through from a client he had been connected to through his trusted circle. They needed his insight on a critical issue. It was urgent, but it was also exactly the type of challenge he thrived on. He responded calmly, outlining his approach and setting expectations. The client appreciated the clarity and decisiveness, immediately putting trust in his hands. By mid-morning, he reflected on how the office world he had left behind was still moving, still full of deadlines and pressure. He wondered how many of his former colleagues were caught in the same cycle he had escaped. He did not feel superiority or resentment. He simply felt freedom, the rare kind that comes when someone steps fully into a life aligned with their values. Later, he joined a meeting with the group of people he trusted. They discussed strategies, projects, and opportunities that were gradually taking shape. Conversations were honest, constructive, and collaborative. Ideas were exchanged freely, and respect was mutual. For the first time, he realized that success could be measured by growth and impact, not by compliance or the approval of a single authority figure. In the afternoon, he took time to reflect. He thought about the journey that led him here, the long days, the stress, the moments of doubt, but also the preparation, the quiet planning, the consistent effort outside the office walls. He understood that leaving his job was not just an act of escape, but an intentional move into a life where his skills and efforts mattered on a broader, more meaningful scale as evening approached. He began connecting with several contacts he had met over time. They shared insights, advice, and collaborative opportunities. It was a network built on trust and respect. Unlike the transactional and hierarchical relationships of his former workplace, each conversation reinforced the understanding that real influence and opportunity came from knowledge, trust, and consistent effort. The night was calm. He sat with a cup of tea, reviewing notes and ideas for future projects. The quiet of the evening felt like a reward for years of unseen effort. He realized that his life was no longer dictated by external pressures, but guided by intentional choice. Each decision, each action, each interaction was a step toward building something lasting and meaningful. He reflected on the former office and the boss, who had once held power over him. There was no anger, no desire for revenge, only clarity. The boss had relied on fear and control, unaware that influence and respect could not be demanded, only earned. The shift in power had happened quietly, naturally, and irreversibly, and he had been ready for it all along. As he prepared for bed, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment and anticipation. Life was not without challenges, but challenges were now opportunities rather than threats. He had left the old world behind and stepped into one that recognized his true value, cultivated his skills, and respected his presence. He drifted to sleep with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the future was in his hands, shaped by intention, preparation, and integrity. This was the life he had prepared for, and he was ready to embrace it fully.